The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her combat boots for what felt like the 100th time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of the upcoming deployment briefing, but from the weight of the secret she carried. At 28, Maria had already served 3 tours in Afghanistan, each one leaving invisible scars that she buried deeper with every mission. Today's briefing would determine whether she'd be leading her squad into what intelligence reports called the most dangerous sector in Helmand province. Maria's reputation preceded her wherever she went on base. Other Marines whispered about her reckless courage, how she charged headfirst into enemy fire to drag wounded comrades to safety. What they didn't know was that her fearlessness came from a place of profound pain. 6 months ago, she'd received news that her younger brother, also a Marine, had been killed by an improvised explosive device while on patrol in Iraq. The guilt of not being there to protect him ate away at her daily, driving her to take increasingly dangerous risks in combat situations. As she walked toward the briefing room, Maria caught her reflection in a window. Her dark eyes, once bright with ambition and hope, now held a hardness that concerned even her closest friends. Her fellow squad members respected her leadership but worried about her recent behavior. During their last mission, she had disobeyed direct orders to stay in position, instead rushing into an active firefight to rescue a trapped Afghan child. While the rescue was successful, her commanding officer had written her up for insubordination. The briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as Marines filed in, their faces a mixture of determination and apprehension. Maria took her usual seat in the third row, close enough to hear every detail but far enough back to avoid unwanted attention from the brass. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes entered the room with his characteristic stern expression, followed by intelligence officers carrying classified folders marked with red tape. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes began, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade, "what you're about to hear is classified at the highest levels. Our intelligence indicates that a high-value Taliban leader, known as the Ghost, has been operating from a compound in the mountains near Musakala. This individual is responsible for coordinating attacks that have killed over 200 coalition forces in the past year alone." Maria's attention sharpened as aerial photographs appeared on the projection screen. The compound looked like a fortress, surrounded by rocky terrain that provided natural cover for defenders. Intelligence estimates suggested at least 40 well-armed insurgents protected the site, with multiple escape routes through mountain caves that had been used by fighters for decades. "The mission," Hayes continued, "is a joint operation between Marines and Army Special Forces. The objective is simple in concept but complex in execution: infiltrate the compound, capture or eliminate the target, and extract without casualties. The operation will take place in 72 hours, during the new moon when visibility is minimal." As the briefing progressed, Maria studied every detail of the mission plan. The assault would require perfect coordination between ground forces, air support, and intelligence assets. Any mistake could result in a massacre, with her squad caught in the crossfire between determined enemies and unforgiving terrain. Yet something about the plan troubled her. The proposed approach seemed too conventional, too predictable for an enemy known for his cunning and ability to anticipate coalition tactics. During the question period, Maria raised her hand. "Sir, has intelligence considered that the Ghost might be expecting this type of frontal assault? His previous escapes suggest he has sources within local government or coalition forces." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes paused, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Staff Sergeant Santos, our intelligence professionals have thoroughly analyzed all possibilities. Your job is to execute the mission as planned, not to second-guess strategic decisions made above your pay grade." The rebuke stung, but Maria pressed on. "With respect, sir, my squad has operated in this region before. The local population near Musakala has been turned against coalition forces through intimidation and propaganda. We might be walking into a trap that could cost dozens of lives." The room fell silent as every eye turned toward Maria. Her fellow Marines shifted uncomfortably, knowing her tendency to speak truth to power regardless of consequences. Hayes's face reddened with anger, and she could see him mentally composing the disciplinary action he would take after the briefing. "Staff Sergeant Santos," he said through clenched teeth, "your concerns are noted and will be ignored. If you cannot follow orders without question, perhaps you need to reconsider your fitness for combat leadership. Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she remained silent. Around her, fellow Marines looked down at their hands or studied their boots, unwilling to risk similar treatment. The briefing continued for another hour, covering logistics, communication protocols, and contingency plans that seemed inadequate for the complexity of the mission ahead. After dismissal, Maria walked alone toward her squad's quarters, her mind racing with alternatives to the suicide mission they'd just been assigned. The official plan called for her team to provide overwatch from a ridge 800 meters from the compound while the primary assault team approached from the north. But her instincts, honed by years of combat experience, screamed that something was wrong with the intelligence they'd been given. That evening, Maria sat in the base chapel, seeking solace in the quiet space that had become her refuge during difficult times. She wasn't particularly religious, but the chapel's peaceful atmosphere helped her think clearly about impossible situations. As she stared at the simple wooden cross above the altar, memories of her brother flooded back. Miguel had always been the careful one, the planner who thought through every decision twice before acting. She remembered his last letter, written just days before his death, warning her to trust her instincts even when orders contradicted common sense. "You're overthinking again," came a familiar voice from behind her. Maria turned to see Corporal Jackson Williams, her squad's radio operator and closest friend on base. Jackson had served with her through 2 deployments, watching her back in countless firefights and sharing the burden of command decisions that kept their fellow Marines alive. "The mission briefing has everyone spooked," Jackson continued, sliding into the pew beside her. "Half the squad thinks we're being sent on a one-way trip. The other half is ready to follow you into hell because they trust your judgment more than they trust the brass." Maria sighed, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. "What if my judgment is compromised, Jackson? What if I'm so desperate to honor Miguel's memory that I'm putting everyone else at risk?" Jackson studied her face in the dim light filtering through stained glass windows. "You saved my life in San Jin when you ignored orders to stay in position. You saved Rodriguez when you carried him 3 kilometers under enemy fire. Every Marine in our squad owes their life to your reckless decisions. Maybe the problem isn't your judgment. Maybe the problem is a command structure that's forgotten what it means to adapt and survive in combat." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps echoing through the chapel's stone corridors. Chaplain Morrison appeared, a kind-faced man in his 50s who had ministered to Marines through some of their darkest moments. He nodded respectfully to both Marines before taking a seat in the front pew, understanding without words that they needed space to work through their struggles. "I keep thinking about the families," Maria whispered to Jackson. "Every Marine going on this mission has people back home who love them, who are counting on them to come back alive. How do I weigh my gut feeling against direct orders from superior officers who have access to intelligence I don't?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment before responding. "My grandmother used to tell me that sometimes doing the right thing means accepting consequences that other people don't understand. She lived through segregation, through times when following the rules meant accepting injustice. She taught me that true courage isn't about following orders blindly. It's about standing up for what you know is right, even when standing up costs you everything." As they sat in contemplative silence, Maria's mind wandered to the compound they would assault in less than 3 days. She visualized the approach routes, the defensive positions, the escape paths that the Ghost had undoubtedly prepared for exactly this scenario. Every tactical instinct she possessed suggested that the mission would fail catastrophically unless someone had the courage to deviate from the plan. The next morning brought unwelcome news that confirmed Maria's worst fears. Intelligence reports indicated increased insurgent activity in the target area, with local sources reporting the movement of additional fighters toward the compound. Rather than postponing the mission to reassess, Command decided to accelerate the timeline, moving the assault to the following evening. Maria spent the day with her squad, conducting final equipment checks and reviewing individual responsibilities. Each Marine understood their role in the mission, but she could see doubt in their eyes. These were seasoned fighters who had survived multiple combat deployments through careful planning and adaptive tactics. The rigid approach demanded by their superiors contradicted everything they had learned about staying alive in hostile territory. Staff Sergeant, said Private First Class Thompson, the squad's youngest member at 19, my dad served in Vietnam, and he always told me that the best officers were the ones who cared more about bringing their people home than about pleasing generals. I just want you to know that whatever decision you make out there, we trust you. The simple statement hit Maria harder than any criticism from her superiors. Thompson represented the future of the Marine Corps, young men and women who volunteered to serve their country with courage and honor. The thought of leading him into a preventable disaster because she lacked the courage to challenge flawed orders made her physically ill. That night, unable to sleep, Maria walked the base perimeter under a star-filled sky that reminded her of camping trips with Miguel when they were children. He had taught her to navigate by the stars, explaining how ancient travelers used celestial markers to find their way across unknown territory. Now she faced her own navigation challenge, trying to find a path between duty and conscience that would keep her Marines alive. As dawn approached, Maria made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She would follow orders during the initial phase of the mission, but if her tactical assessment proved correct and the assault turned into a slaughter, she would act according to her conscience rather than her orders. The decision brought a strange sense of peace, even though she understood it might end her career and result in court-martial proceedings. The final briefing took place in a secured hangar, with maps spread across folding tables and satellite imagery displayed on portable screens. Intelligence officers provided last-minute updates while helicopter pilots reviewed flight paths and contingency procedures. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone aware that operations like this one had a way of going wrong in spectacular and deadly fashion. Maria listened carefully to every detail, noting discrepancies between current intelligence and the assumptions underlying their mission plan. Enemy strength estimates varied wildly depending on the source, and communication intercepts suggested that insurgent leaders were aware of unusual coalition activity in the region. Despite these red flags, command maintained confidence in their approach, dismissing concerns as pre-mission jitters common among combat units. As Marines loaded onto transport helicopters that would carry them toward their destiny, Maria took one last look at the base that had been home for the past 6 months. Somewhere in the distance, other military units were conducting their own missions, pursuing objectives that seemed clearer and more achievable than the one her squad faced. She wondered if those Marines had leaders willing to risk everything for their subordinates' lives, or if blind obedience to questionable orders was becoming the new standard for military service. The helicopter lifted off with a mechanical roar that drowned out conversation and forced each Marine to retreat into their own thoughts. Through the aircraft's small windows, the landscape below looked peaceful in the early morning light, giving no hint of the violence that would soon erupt across those hills and valleys. Maria closed her eyes and said a silent prayer for her brother's spirit, asking for the wisdom to make decisions that would honor both his memory and the trust placed in her by the Marines under her command. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, 30 kilometers from the target compound as enemy mortar rounds exploded in the distance. Maria's squad moved quickly from the aircraft to a concealed position behind rock formations that provided natural cover from observation and direct fire. The pre-dawn darkness offered protection, but it also concealed enemy positions that might be watching their every movement through night vision equipment. As the assault team prepared to move toward their objective, Maria established her overwatch position on the designated ridge. Through her scope, she could see the compound clearly, noting details that intelligence photographs had missed. The buildings showed recent modification, with new walls and defensive positions that suggested preparation for exactly this type of attack. Worse, she observed movement patterns that indicated significantly more defenders than intelligence estimates had suggested. "Command, this is Overwatch 6, Maria spoke into her radio, using the call sign assigned for the mission. I count at least 60 individuals in and around the target building. This is 3 times the estimated enemy strength. Request permission to reassess approach." The response crackled through her earpiece with barely contained irritation. "Overwatch 6, maintain your position and provide supporting fire as directed. Assault team is moving to contact in 15 minutes. Do not deviate from the mission plan." Maria watched through her scope as the primary assault team moved through terrain that offered little concealment. The route they followed matched exactly what any competent enemy commander would expect, leading directly into what appeared to be a carefully prepared killing zone. She could see muzzle flashes from positions that weren't marked on any intelligence map, indicating that the defenders had established interlocking fields of fire designed to massacre anyone approaching from the planned direction. "Jackson," she whispered to her radio operator, "get me a direct channel to the assault team leader. We need to warn them about those defensive positions." Before Jackson could respond, the night erupted in gunfire as the assault team walked directly into the ambush Maria had predicted. Tracer rounds lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks, and the sound of explosions echoed across the valley as insurgents detonated improvised explosive devices along the Americans' route. Through her scope, Maria watched in horror as Marines fell under the withering fire, pinned down in positions that offered no cover from the elevated enemy positions. "All stations, this is Assault 6, came the desperate voice of the assault team leader. "We are taking heavy casualties and need immediate support. Enemy positions are not where intelligence indicated. We cannot advance or retreat without significant losses." Maria's training told her to maintain her overwatch position and provide covering fire from her current location. But her conscience and her tactical instincts demanded immediate action to save the Marines who were being slaughtered in the valley below. She could see wounded men crawling toward inadequate cover while their comrades tried unsuccessfully to suppress enemy fire from multiple directions. "Command, this is Overwatch 6 requesting permission to reposition and flank enemy positions. Current Overwatch position cannot effectively support the assault team." "Negative, Overwatch 6. Maintain your position. Air support is en route with estimated arrival in 20 minutes. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours for the Marines trapped in the killing zone." Maria could see through her scope that several wounded men would bleed out long before air support arrived, and the enemy was already moving to surround the assault team's position. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, with each passing minute bringing the assault team closer to complete annihilation. Maria made the decision that would define her military career. "Squad, we're moving to flank the enemy positions on the north side of the compound. Jackson, inform command of our movement but do not wait for permission. Thompson and Rodriguez, you're with me on the assault element. Williams and Parker, establish supporting positions and provide covering fire." "Staff Sergeant," Jackson said quietly, "you know what this means. Command will have you court-martialed for disobeying direct orders during combat." Maria checked her weapon and prepared to move out. "Jackson, those Marines down there are dying while we sit on this ridge following orders that are getting people killed. I didn't become a Marine to watch good people die because of bad decisions made by officers who aren't here." The movement down from their overwatch position required careful navigation through rocky terrain in near total darkness. Each step had to be precise to avoid creating noise that would alert enemy sentries to their approach. Maria led her team along a route that would bring them to the compound's weakest point, a section of wall that showed signs of recent damage from previous coalition attacks. As they moved, the radio crackled with increasingly desperate calls from the assault team. 2 Marines were confirmed dead, with at least 6 others wounded and unable to move to safety. The enemy was using the elevated positions around the compound to direct devastating fire onto anyone who tried to help the casualties, creating a tactical situation that could only be resolved through bold action. Maria's flanking maneuver brought her team to within 50 meters of the enemy's main defensive position. Through her night vision equipment, she could see insurgent fighters coordinating their fire and preparing to launch a final assault that would overrun the pinned-down Marines. The tactical situation demanded immediate action, with no time for the careful planning that military doctrine required for such operations. "Thompson, when I give the signal, place suppressing fire on the position to our left. Rodriguez, you take the right side. Jackson, get on the radio and guide our air support to the coordinates I'm about to give you. We're going to create enough chaos to allow the assault team to withdraw." The attack began with grenades thrown into enemy positions, followed immediately by assault rifle fire that caught the defenders completely by surprise. Maria's small team moved with the precision of veterans who had fought together through multiple deployments, each Marine understanding his role without need for detailed instructions. The surprise was complete, with insurgent fighters turning to face this unexpected threat from their undefended flank. For several crucial minutes, Maria's aggressive action drew enemy fire away from the trapped assault team. The Marines in the valley used this respite to drag their wounded to better cover and establish defensive positions that could hold until air support arrived. But the enemy quickly recovered from their surprise and began concentrating overwhelming fire on Maria's small team.
"We need to withdraw," shouted Rodriguez as bullets shattered rocks around their position. "They're bringing up reinforcements from inside the compound."
Maria could see that their position was becoming untenable, but she also realized that falling back would again expose the assault team to the devastating crossfire that had already cost so many casualties. The tactical situation demanded a choice between preserving her own squad and maintaining pressure on the enemy until air support could effectively engage.
"Jackson, call in air support on our position. Danger close, troops in contact. Tell them to hit the compound with everything they've got." "Staff Sergeant, that's too close.
If they miss the target by 50 meters, we're all dead." Maria looked through her scope at the Marines in the valley, some of whom were barely moving as they bled from their wounds. In the distance, she could hear the sound of approaching aircraft, but she knew that without accurate targeting information, the air support might hit friendly forces instead of enemy positions. "I'm going to mark the target with infrared strobes," she told her team. "When the aircraft arrive, they'll need a clear indication of enemy positions.
Cover me while I move forward."
What Maria proposed was essentially a suicide mission. Moving closer to the enemy compound would expose her to fire from multiple directions, with little hope of survival once her position was discovered. But it was the only way to provide air support with the precise targeting information needed to destroy enemy positions without hitting friendly forces. Jackson grabbed her arm as she prepared to move.
"There has to be another way. We can't lose you too."
Maria looked at each member of her squad, young Marines who had trusted her with their lives through countless dangerous situations.
"If something happens to me, get the team back to the extraction point. Don't try to be heroes. Just get them home alive."
The movement toward the enemy compound required crossing 50 meters of open ground under direct observation from multiple defensive positions. Maria used smoke grenades to obscure her movement, but the covering smoke also concealed enemy fighters who were moving to intercept her. Each step brought her closer to certain death, but also closer to providing the targeting information that would save the Marines trapped in the valley. Halfway to her objective, Maria's luck ran out. A hidden machine gun position opened fire, and she felt the burning sensation of bullets penetrating her body armor and finding soft tissue underneath. The impact knocked her to the ground, but adrenaline and determination kept her moving toward the compound wall where she could deploy the infrared markers that would guide incoming air support. Blood flowed freely from wounds in her shoulder and leg, making movement increasingly difficult as shock began to affect her coordination and decision-making ability. But the sound of approaching aircraft motivated her to continue crawling toward her objective, knowing that failure would result in the death of every Marine in the assault team. With her remaining strength, Maria activated infrared strobe lights and placed them at key points around the enemy defensive positions. The strobes were invisible to the naked eye but would clearly mark target locations for pilots using night vision equipment. As she completed her task, enemy fighters discovered her position and began concentrating their fire on her location. "Air support, this is ground element marking target with infrared.
Enemy positions are marked with strobes.
Friendly forces are 200 meters south of the strobes in the valley.
Request immediate close air support."
The response came from the pilot of an A-10 attack aircraft designed specifically for close air support missions.
"Ground element, we have your strobes in sight. We are beginning our attack run. Keep your heads down." The sound of the A-10's cannon was unmistakable, a distinctive roar that sent 30mm shells into enemy positions with devastating accuracy.
Secondary explosions indicated that the aircraft had struck ammunition storage areas, while the sudden cessation of enemy fire confirmed that the defensive positions had been effectively neutralized. But Maria's triumph was short-lived. The wounds she had sustained were more serious than initially realized, and blood loss was affecting her ability to remain conscious. As enemy reinforcements approached her position from inside the compound, she realized that her aggressive action had saved the assault team but left her trapped behind enemy lines with no possibility of extraction.
"Jackson, this is Maria. I'm hit pretty bad and surrounded.
Get the assault team out of here.
Don't let anyone try to come back for me."
That's an order. Through the radio, she could hear Jackson's voice breaking with emotion as he acknowledged her final instruction. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors indicated that medical evacuation aircraft were arriving to collect the wounded from the assault team. Her sacrifice had achieved its objective, but the cost would be measured in a young woman's life rather than the lives of the Marines she had saved. As consciousness faded, Maria thought about her brother Miguel and the promise she had made to honor his memory through service to others. In her final moments of awareness, she felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that her decision to disobey orders had saved lives that would otherwise have been lost to institutional inflexibility and poor planning. The tactical situation had demanded adaptive leadership, and she had provided it at the ultimate personal cost. Maria awakened to the sound of unfamiliar voices speaking in Pashto, her body racked with pain from wounds that had been roughly bandaged with whatever materials her captors could find. The room around her was small and dark, carved from rock in what appeared to be one of the mountain caves that intelligence had mentioned during their mission briefing. Weak sunlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling, suggesting that she had been unconscious for several hours. Her captors were not the hardened Taliban fighters she had expected to encounter. Instead, they appeared to be local villagers, including an elderly man who seemed to be some sort of traditional healer. Through broken English and hand gestures, they communicated that they had found her bleeding near the compound and brought her to this cave to treat her wounds, risking their own lives to help an enemy combatant. Why? Maria managed to ask through cracked lips, genuinely confused by their unexpected kindness. The elderly healer, who introduced himself as Ahmad, explained through halting English that his grandson had been the Afghan child she had rescued during her previous mission, the action that had resulted in disciplinary proceedings from her commanding officer. Word of her intervention had spread throughout the local community, creating a debt of honor that these villagers felt obligated to repay. Over the following days, as Maria's strength slowly returned, she learned about the complex web of relationships that define life in this remote region. The villagers lived in constant fear of both Taliban retribution and coalition military actions that often failed to distinguish between combatants and civilians. They had developed survival strategies based on helping anyone who showed them kindness, regardless of which side they represented in the larger conflict. Ahmad's daughter, Fatima, served as translator and explained that the compound Maria's unit had attacked was indeed used by Taliban fighters, but it also served as a medical clinic for local civilians who had nowhere else to receive treatment. The assault had destroyed medicines and equipment that the community desperately needed, creating resentment that would take years to overcome. "Your military leaders, they do not understand," Fatima said as she changed Maria's bandages with supplies that were clearly in short supply. "They see only enemies and targets. They do not see families and children who need help. But you are different. You risked your life to save my nephew. That is why we help you now." The moral complexity of the situation weighed heavily on Maria's mind as she recovered. Her tactical instincts had been correct about the flawed mission plan, but the consequences extended far beyond military casualties. The destruction of medical facilities would affect innocent civilians for months or years to come, creating new grievances that would fuel future conflict. Meanwhile, word of her capture had reached American forces, but rescue attempts were complicated by the political sensitivity of operating in an area where local civilians were sheltering her. Any aggressive action to secure her release might result in civilian casualties that would permanently damage relationships with communities that were already suspicious of American intentions. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a seasoned intelligence officer with extensive experience in the region, was assigned to coordinate Maria's recovery through diplomatic rather than military means. Mitchell understood that the situation presented an opportunity to build bridges with local communities if handled with appropriate cultural sensitivity and respect for local customs. "We need to approach this differently," Mitchell explained to her staff during a planning session at Bagram Air Base. Staff Sergeant Santos has inadvertently created a relationship with these villagers that could be more valuable than anything we might achieve through force. Our priority is her safe return, but we also need to consider the broader implications for our mission in this region. The negotiation process required patience and cultural understanding that many military officers lacked. Mitchell worked through local tribal leaders and religious authorities, offering medical supplies and infrastructure assistance in exchange for Maria's return. The discussions took place over several weeks, with each side carefully evaluating the trustworthiness and intentions of the other. During this time, Maria's presence in the cave created unexpected opportunities for dialogue between American and Afghan perspectives on the conflict. Ahmad and his family shared stories about how the war had affected their community, describing losses and hardships that rarely appeared in intelligence reports or news coverage. Their accounts provided Maria with insights into local grievances that could inform future military operations. Before the war, Ahmad explained one evening as they shared a simple meal of rice and vegetables, this valley was peaceful. Farmers grew crops, children attended school, and families lived without fear. Now we are caught between fighters who claim to protect us and soldiers who see us as threats. We want only to live in peace and safety. Maria began to understand how her unit's approach to the recent mission had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. Military planners had focused exclusively on eliminating a high-value target without considering the broader context of community relationships and civilian infrastructure. The result was tactical success that created strategic failure, destroying trust that had taken years to build. As her physical condition improved, Maria started helping with daily tasks around the cave and surrounding areas. She assisted with medical care for villagers who had no other access to treatment, using skills learned during her military medical training. These interactions revealed the extent to which the local population had been affected by years of conflict and instability. Word of Maria's activities reached American intelligence officers through various channels, creating a complex situation for military planners. Her unauthorized cooperation with local civilians could be seen as collaboration with potential enemies, but it was also generating valuable intelligence about community dynamics and insurgent operations in the region. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who had been critical of Maria's questioning during the original mission briefing, found himself in the uncomfortable position of defending her actions to superior officers who were questioning her loyalty and judgment. The successful outcome of her tactical decisions during the ambush had saved American lives, but her current situation raised questions about appropriate conduct for captured personnel. Staff Sergeant Santos has consistently demonstrated exceptional leadership and tactical judgment, Hayes wrote in his report to division headquarters. Her actions during the ambush, while technically insubordinate, prevented what could have been a complete disaster for the assault team. Her current cooperation with local civilians appears to be generating intelligence that could prove valuable for future operations. The political dimensions of Maria's situation became more complex when Afghan government officials learned about the negotiations for her release. Some officials viewed American willingness to negotiate with rural communities as acknowledgement of their authority and legitimacy. Others saw it as bypassing established governmental structures and setting dangerous precedents for future incidents. General David Thompson, commander of coalition forces in the region, made the decision to treat Maria's case as a test of new approaches to civil-military relations. Rather than demanding her immediate return through threats or military action, he authorized continued negotiations that treated local communities as legitimate stakeholders in her fate. We have an opportunity here to demonstrate that American forces can operate with respect for local customs and community concerns, Thompson explained to his senior staff. Staff Sergeant Santos has created a situation that allows us to build trust in a region where trust has been severely damaged by years of conflict. The breakthrough in negotiations came when Ahmad proposed a formal exchange ceremony that would honor both American and Afghan traditions. Maria would be returned to American forces during a gathering of tribal leaders and military officers, with both sides making public commitments to improved cooperation and mutual respect. Preparing for the ceremony required careful coordination between military planners and cultural advisors who understood the symbolic importance of various rituals and procedures. The event would be watched closely by local communities throughout the region, with its success or failure affecting American relationships with civilians for years to come. Maria's role in the ceremony presented particular challenges, as her actions during captivity had created expectations among local civilians about American willingness to engage respectfully with their communities. Her behavior during the ceremony would be interpreted as indicating broader American attitudes toward Afghan culture and sovereignty. Colonel Mitchell spent considerable time preparing Maria for her role in the exchange ceremony, explaining the cultural significance of various elements and the importance of demonstrating respect for local traditions. The ceremony would take place in a valley between American and Afghan-controlled areas, with representatives from both sides participating in rituals that emphasized shared humanity rather than military opposition. "This isn't just about getting you back safely," Mitchell explained during one of their preparatory meetings. "Your experience with Ahmad's family has created an opportunity to reset relationships in this region. How we handle this ceremony could determine whether local communities see us as occupiers or as potential partners." The evening before the ceremony, Maria sat with Ahmad and his family for what would be their final meal together. The elderly healer had become something of a father figure during her recovery, offering wisdom about forgiveness and reconciliation that transcended cultural and religious differences. His willingness to risk his family's safety to help an enemy combatant had profoundly affected Maria's understanding of courage and honor. "You have learned much during your time with us," Ahmad observed as they prepared to part ways. "But the most important lesson is that peace requires understanding between people, not just between governments or armies. You can carry this understanding back to your leaders." As Maria prepared for sleep in the cave one final time, she reflected on how her experience as a captive had changed her perspective on the conflict and her role as a military leader. The courage required to build bridges between communities was different from the courage needed in combat, but it was equally demanding and, perhaps more important, for lasting peace. The morning of the exchange ceremony dawned clear and cold, with representatives from both sides gathering in a valley that had been chosen for its symbolic neutrality. American helicopters circled overhead while Afghan tribal leaders arrived on horseback and in vehicles that had seen better days. The contrast between modern military technology and traditional cultural practices highlighted the challenges of building understanding between such different worldviews. Maria dressed carefully in a clean uniform that Colonel Mitchell had brought for the occasion, knowing that her appearance would be scrutinized by everyone present. Her wounds had healed enough to allow normal movement, though she still carried physical reminders of her decision to disobey orders and save her fellow Marines' lives. As she prepared to return to American custody, she wondered what consequences awaited her for actions that had been both militarily successful and formally insubordinate. 6 months after the exchange ceremony, Maria found herself seated at a polished conference table in the Pentagon, waiting for what she expected would be a formal court-martial proceeding. Her dress blue uniform bore the ribbons and decorations earned through multiple combat deployments, but she knew that her military career was likely ending in disgrace. The charges against her included insubordination, failure to follow direct orders, and reckless endangerment of personnel under her command. The room where she waited was sterile and intimidating, with American flags positioned around a raised platform where military judges would normally sit. Her defense attorney, Major Rebecca Chen, had prepared extensively for what promised to be a complex case involving military law, combat decision-making, and the broader question of when subordinate officers have the authority to override superior orders based on tactical judgment. "Remember," Major Chen said quietly as they reviewed their final preparations, "the prosecution will focus on the strict legal interpretation of military hierarchy and the importance of following orders during combat operations. Our defense is based on the results of your actions and the doctrine of command responsibility that requires leaders to prioritize the welfare of their subordinates." Maria nodded, though her mind was focused less on legal technicalities than on the faces of the Marines whose lives had been saved by her decision to disobey orders. Letters of support had arrived from every member of her squad, along with testimonials from the assault team members who credited her actions with their survival. The weight of their trust felt heavier than any potential punishment the military justice system might impose. The door to the conference room opened, and Maria expected to see the prosecution team entering to begin formal proceedings. Instead, she was surprised to see Colonel Mitchell, who had coordinated her recovery from captivity, accompanied by several officers she didn't recognize. Their expressions were serious but not hostile, suggesting that something unusual was about to unfold. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Colonel Mitchell said formally, "please remain seated. We're waiting for some additional participants before we begin today's proceedings." The wait stretched for several more minutes, during which Maria's anxiety continued to build. Major Chen seemed equally puzzled by the delay and the informal atmosphere that was developing in what should have been a formal military courtroom. The officers who had entered with Colonel Mitchell were reviewing documents and speaking in quiet tones that suggested careful preparation for whatever was about to occur. When the door opened again, Maria's breath caught in her throat. 4 individuals entered wearing the stars and insignia that marked them as general officers, the highest ranks in the American military hierarchy. She recognized General Thompson, who had overseen her case during the negotiations for her release, but the other 3 were unfamiliar figures whose presence suggested that her situation had attracted attention at the highest levels of military leadership. "Staff Sergeant Santos," said General Thompson as he approached the table where she sat, "please stand." Maria rose to attention, her heart pounding as she tried to understand what was happening. The 4 generals arranged themselves in a line facing her, their expressions grave but not accusatory. Behind them, other officers and civilian officials filed into the room, including individuals she recognized from news coverage as senior Pentagon officials and policy advisors. General Patricia Williams, a distinguished officer with extensive combat experience, stepped forward as the apparent senior representative. "Staff Sergeant Santos, we are here today not to conduct a court-martial, but to address a situation that has raised fundamental questions about military leadership, tactical decision-making, and the courage required to do what is right under impossible circumstances." The unexpected turn of events left Maria struggling to process what she was hearing. 4 months, she had prepared herself for disgrace and the end of her military career. The presence of 4 generals suggested either that her case had attracted unprecedented attention or that something entirely different was about to unfold. "Your actions during the operation 6 months ago," General Williams continued, "initially appeared to constitute clear violations of military discipline and the chain of command. You disobeyed direct orders, abandoned your assigned position, and conducted unauthorized offensive operations that placed your squad at significant risk." Maria remained at attention, waiting for the formal charges that would end her career and possibly result in imprisonment. Around the room, the assembled officials watched with expressions that suggested they were witnessing something historically significant, though the nature of that significance remained unclear to her. "However," General Williams said, her tone shifting slightly, "subsequent analysis of your actions and their consequences has led us to a very different conclusion about the nature of military leadership and the responsibilities that come with command authority in combat situations." The general paused, consulting notes that had been prepared for this moment. "Your tactical assessment of the mission was accurate. Your prediction that the assault team would encounter significantly stronger enemy resistance proved correct. Your identification of fundamental flaws in the operational plan was validated by subsequent investigation into intelligence failures and planning assumptions." Maria felt a surge of confusion mixed with hope. The direction of the general's comments suggested that her actions were being evaluated differently than she had expected. Major Chen, seated beside her, appeared equally surprised by the turn the proceedings were taking. General Robert Hayes, a veteran of multiple combat commands, stepped forward to continue the presentation. "More importantly, your decision to disobey orders and conduct a flanking maneuver saved the lives of at least 12 Marines who would have died if you had maintained your assigned overwatch position. The assault team leader has formally testified that your intervention was the decisive factor in preventing a complete tactical disaster." The room remained silent as the general's words sank in. Maria had known that her actions had helped the assault team, but she hadn't realized the full extent of lives saved by her decision to trust tactical instincts over formal orders. The knowledge that 12 families had been spared the grief she had experienced when Miguel was killed brought tears to her eyes that she struggled to control. General Michael Foster, the youngest of the 4 generals present, addressed the broader implications of Maria's case. "Your experience as a prisoner of war, and the relationships you built with local civilian communities, has provided us with intelligence and cultural insights that have fundamentally changed our approach to operations in that region. The medical assistance you provided to Afghan civilians has generated more positive intelligence about insurgent activities than any other single source." The unexpected praise continued as General Foster described how Maria's conduct during captivity had demonstrated American values in ways that traditional military operations could never achieve. Her willingness to help treat sick and wounded civilians had convinced local communities that American forces could be trusted partners rather than occupying enemies. The exchange ceremony, General Foster continued, has become a model for how military forces can engage respectfully with local populations in conflict zones. 3 other regional commanders have requested similar cultural advisors to help them develop community engagement strategies based on your experience. General Thompson stepped forward to deliver what appeared to be the conclusion of the formal presentation. Staff Sergeant Santos, the United States Marine Corps has spent considerable time evaluating your actions and their consequences. We have consulted with military historians, tactical analysts, cultural experts, and the Marines whose lives you saved. Maria remained at attention, though her mind was reeling from the unexpected direction the proceedings had taken. Instead of the court-martial she had anticipated, she was hearing a detailed analysis of how her decisions had generated positive outcomes across multiple dimensions of military operations. Military leadership, General Thompson continued, requires the courage to make difficult decisions under conditions of uncertainty and incomplete information. Sometimes those decisions require following orders even when they seem flawed. Sometimes they require trusting tactical judgment even when it contradicts formal commands. The general paused, his expression becoming more personal as he addressed Maria directly. Your brother Miguel's death in Iraq was the result of similar circumstances. His unit's commanding officer followed flawed intelligence and inadequate operational planning that placed his Marines in unnecessary danger. Miguel died because his leaders lacked the courage to adapt their plans when tactical conditions changed. The mention of her brother's death struck Maria like a physical blow. She had never learned the specific circumstances that led to Miguel's death, only that he had been killed by an improvised explosive device during a routine patrol. The knowledge that his death might have been preventable through better leadership decisions added a new dimension to her grief and her understanding of military responsibility. General Williams resumed speaking, her voice carrying the weight of formal military authority. The United States Marine Corps has determined that your actions during the operation represent the highest traditions of military leadership. You placed the welfare of your subordinates above your own career interests. You trusted tactical judgment over institutional conformity. You demonstrated courage not just in combat, but in taking responsibility for decisions that could have ended your military service. The room fell silent as General Williams reached for a small wooden box that had been placed on the table beside her. Maria recognized the distinctive shape and size of a container that typically held military decorations, though she couldn't imagine what award might be appropriate for someone who had technically violated direct orders. Staff Sergeant Santos, General Williams said formally, by order of the President of the United States, you are hereby awarded the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. Your actions on that day saved the lives of 12 Marines and demonstrated the courage and leadership that represents the highest ideals of military service. The words hit Maria with such force that she nearly lost her composure entirely. The Silver Star was one of the military's highest decorations for valor, typically reserved for extraordinary heroism in combat situations. That such an award was being presented for actions that she had viewed as potential career-ending insubordination seemed impossible to process. As General Williams pinned the Silver Star to Maria's uniform, the assembled officials rose in applause that echoed through the conference room. Maria's tears flowed freely now, not from shame or fear, but from overwhelming emotion at having her decisions validated by the institution she had served with such dedication. General Thompson stepped forward to deliver the final element of the ceremony. Staff Sergeant Santos, the Marine Corps has also decided to promote you to the rank of Gunnery Sergeant, effective immediately. Additionally, you are being assigned to the staff of the Marine Corps Command and Staff College, where you will develop training programs for junior officers based on your experience with tactical decision-making and cultural engagement. The promotion and new assignment represented not just vindication, but an opportunity to influence how future Marine leaders would be trained to handle the complex situations that modern warfare presented. Maria would be able to share the lessons learned from her experience, helping other Marines avoid the rigid thinking that had nearly caused a disaster. As the formal ceremony concluded, the 4 generals approached Maria individually to offer personal congratulations and share their own experiences with difficult command decisions. Each had faced moments when institutional pressures conflicted with tactical judgment, and they recognized in her actions the courage that effective military leadership required. Later that evening, as Maria sat alone in her quarters processing the day's events, she received a phone call that completed her emotional journey. Jackson Williams, her former radio operator, was calling from Camp Pendleton to congratulate her on the award and promotion that had been announced to the entire Marine Corps. "Maria," Jackson said, his voice thick with emotion, "Miguel would be so proud of what you've accomplished. You honored his memory by having the courage to do what was right, even when it was dangerous and difficult. Every Marine in our old squad wants you to know that we always knew you made the right decision." As Maria hung up the phone, she looked out the window at the American flag flying over the Pentagon courtyard. The flag represented the ideals that had motivated her to serve, but her experience had taught her that serving those ideals sometimes required challenging the systems and institutions that claimed to represent them. True military leadership meant having the courage to adapt, to question, and to place human lives above institutional convenience. The silver star pinned to her uniform represented not just personal recognition, but validation of a leadership philosophy that prioritized tactical effectiveness and moral courage over blind obedience. Maria understood that her story would become part of Marine Corps training, helping future leaders understand when following orders served the mission and when tactical judgment required different approaches. In the months that followed, Maria's new position allowed her to influence military education in ways that honored both her brother's memory and the Marines whose lives had been saved by her decisive action. Her experience demonstrated that sometimes the most important act of loyalty to military institutions was the courage to challenge them when they lost sight of their fundamental mission, bringing every Marine home alive.